Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, recently I had the pleasure of announcing funding for and visiting an organization in Edmonton called UCAN Youth Services. UCAN Youth Services helps young people with barriers to employment and education to overcome those barriers and achieve their full potential. I met dedicated staff and volunteers who spend countless hours unselfishly working to give young people facing challenges an opportunity to discover who they can be. I met young people who are at various stages of turning their lives around and realizing that they do matter and that they do have people who care about their futures. One of the things I participated in was a discussion circle where everyone has a chance to speak openly and honestly. A rock is passed around the circle, and the holder of the rock has the floor while everyone listens attentively. What a quaint notion, Mr. Speaker. As the keeper of the parliamentary rock, perhaps it's an idea that you might consider for adoption in this place. I want to thank and pay tribute to organizations like UCAN Youth Services and people like Kyle who make a tremendous difference in the lives of young Canadians. I also want to recognize young Canadians like Candy, who seize the opportunity and turn their lives around. I would encourage all of us, Mr. Speaker, to be the rock for a young person who needs our help. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, London is my community. Despite suggestions from a member opposite to the contrary, I am proud of my city, and I'm especially proud of the people of London for their show of resiliency, determination, and optimism when faced with some very difficult challenges. However, pride in one's city does not mean that we can ignore reality. My city has been hit hard by the economic downturn. Jobs have been lost. In southwestern Ontario, 10,000 jobs in the last 5 years, most in the manufacturing sector. Families are hurting, and we cannot sugarcoat the issues faced by so many in my riding. London has an unemployment rate of 9.1%. Now, there is a proposal to open a satellite welfare office in the East End. Mr. Speaker, we need a federal government focused on job creation, not tax cuts. Jobs in energy conservation, transit, alternate energy, and green manufacturing. The people of London matter and deserve no less.
Honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the well-known Pembroke businessman and community supporter, Jerry Binhammer. Mr. Binhammer has been named 2011 Upper Ottawa Valley Chamber of Commerce Lifetime Business Achievement Award winner. Wow. While Jerry is well known in the Pembroke business community as the successful owner-operator of the Malcolm Devitt Funeral Home, it's his community work for which Jerry is an honoured member in our area, and how I mostly am aware of his stellar performance. Active in his community as a member of Kiwanis International, the Masonic Lodge, and Ottawa Valley Tuna Shrine Club, Jerry is a firm believer in helping youth. In addition to his work with service clubs, he's been very active with major financial gifts to Algonquin College, Pembroke Regional Hospital, and Miramichi Lodge. Wow. Through his generosity, 9 students each year from local high schools are eligible for $1,000 bursaries for academic achievement to assist with their post-secondary education. It's people like Jerry Binhammer who give the Upper Ottawa Valley its reputation as a kind, caring, wonderful place to live. Congratulations, Jerry, on your outstanding achievement.
No, member for Papineau.
Today marks the last day of Movember, and as our mustaches have grown, so has the popularity of this great campaign. Here in this House, the 3 teams, the New Democrats, the strong, stable Conservative majority, and we Liberals, have together raised over $50,000. Altogether, 245,000 Canadians grew and made Canada by far the #1 country in the world, with over $32 million raised. Movember is a good way to bring attention to men's health issues, but more needs to be done. As Dr. Larry Goldenberg has said, a man is more than just a penis and a prostate, and men's health needs to be about more, too. Men have shorter life expectancies, almost 5 years less, and heart disease, suicide, liver disease, and diabetes are all more prevalent among men. Dr. Goldenberg has taken the first steps in proposing a Canadian Institute of Male Health. We need a national body separate from government that would be entirely focused on men's health, that could coordinate research activities, education campaigns, and other initiatives. Just as Canada leads in Movember, so too can we all lead here in Canada with the Canadian Institute.
The honourable member for York, the Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I was outraged yesterday when I heard that Katyusha rockets were once again fired from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. The Lebanese government must uphold its responsibilities to prevent threats to innocent lives and the resulting terror that this rocket fire indiscriminately puts upon all residents. Despite the presence of UNIFIL, this is the 8th rocket attack on Israel since the 2006 ceasefire agreement. I call on the Lebanese government to maintain control and order in their country and to ensure the safety of their neighbors and internationally protected persons on both sides of the border. Thank you.
Honourable Deputy de Joliette.
The honourable member for Joliette.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais...
Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to pay tribute to a wonderful youth-led initiative in Notre-Dame-de-Prairie in my riding of Joliette. 3 years ago, they launched the Yellow Bikes project. It's a fleet of community bicycles available for free to residents of Greater Joliette. There are a lot of good things about this innovative project. It gives the disadvantaged access to safe transportation, relief from social isolation, and more physical activity. It also gives potential school dropouts a chance to improve their self-esteem by looking after the bikes. It also protects the environment by offering an alternative to cars and reducing greenhouse gases and the amount of pollution. Clearly, this project tackles social issues of current concern and deserves all our support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to express my gratitude for the generosity of SR Steel Algoma. Yesterday, SR created a community investment fund of $5 million to help support community development in Sault Ste. Marie. This is a great example of how our government's low-tax policy is helping corporations to invest in their local communities. I'm proud to be part of a government that encourages job creation and economic growth instead of penalizing productivity through high corporate taxes. Hard work in the private sector is the backbone of this country. The CEO of SR put it best when he said, "Our community's ability to attract and retain qualified professionals and highly skilled personnel is dependent upon the city's economic vitality and social fabric." SR put its money where its mouth is and invested in the community of Sault Ste. Marie. Hear, hear. Thank you, SR Steel Algoma, for leading the way in job creation, corporate responsibility, and unbridled generosity. Sault Ste. Marie is grateful for your presence and activity in our community.
Bravo.
The honourable member for Selkirk Interlake.
Mr. Speaker, this is Movember, and men across the country gave their upper lips for the worthy cause of growing a mustache in support of prostate cancer awareness and men's health. Many stylish and full moles are growing, and some not so much, but it was all done in good fun and for a worthy cause. Last year, there was over 100,000 men from Canada alone that participated in Movember, raising over $22 million, and this year we've already surpassed $32 million. Worldwide, since its inception, Movember has raised over $200 million to fund awareness, research, and to assist those living with prostate cancer. I'm proud to say that this year I was able to participate in the noble efforts of the Movember campaign as I, along with colleagues on both sides of the House and with Canadian men nationwide, gave a valiant effort to raise awareness for prostate cancer. Mr. Speaker, as over 25,000 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer and 1 in 7 will develop the disease in their lifetime, I want to remind men to get their prostates checked. And I ask all women to encourage the men in their lives to visit their doctors.
Hear, hear. For Nickelbell.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to shout a loud Christmas cheer for the Sturgeon Falls volunteer firefighters and their successful Santa Fund telethon last weekend. Hear, hear. Over $37,000 was raised during the West Nipissing telethon. This is an amazing figure, a community of 14,000 people raising $37,000 in 7 hours.
I congratulate the team of firefighters and over 200 volunteers.
To all the businesses, charities, and individuals who donated and made the telethon and toy drive such a success. It is the best result in over 15 years. This means that over 400 families in need will enjoy Christmas. Je souhaite joyeux Noël aux...
I wish Merry Christmas to all the families, children, and the great community of West Nipissing. You make us all proud.
Member for Lethbridge.
Sure. On Sunday, 14 fire departments rallied together to contain 2 raging wildfires near Lethbridge that were fueled by hurricane-force winds. The firefighters were assisted by the police, disaster services, several Hutterite colonies, and other community volunteers. Providence must also be acknowledged. The fires raged for over 12 hours, spread as wide as 9 kilometers, over 40 kilometers long, and one came to the edge of the city, but not a single home or building was burned. As I toured the South Fire with local authorities, we saw that it was nothing short of miraculous the number of times the fire suddenly shifted direction before it would have consumed a home or a building, a group of animals, or a community. Finally, many local emergency preparedness plans were executed, and others were ready to be put into action. So, Mr. Speaker, in addition to praising first responders, I call on individuals, families, communities, and their leaders across the country to get prepared by putting an emergency preparedness plan in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute today to the activism of a woman in my riding, one of this year's winners of a National Recognition of Citizenship Engagement Award. Ms. Catherine Lamontagne, from the Forum Jeunesse Montérégie-Est, was awarded for her great dedication and dynamism in the municipality of Bromont. She's the president of the Bromont Family Advisory Committee and took part in the creation of the Carrefour Familial. This family center provides short-term childcare and networking activities for young families in the region. Thanks to her leadership, the Carrefour Familial in Bromont won the 2001 Municipal and Family Action Award in recognition of the various services provided by this organization. Congratulations to this young woman who's helping families in her community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kitchener-Waterloo.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is actively participating in the worldwide 16 Days of Activism Against Gender Violence campaign. Violence against women affects us all. It destroys families and weakens the fabric of our society. It takes a heavy toll on our communities and on our economy. Since 2007, Status of Women Canada has approved more than $39 million in funding for projects designed specifically to help end violence against women and girls. These projects involve countless hours of dedicated work on the ground in communities. In many cases, they are helping prevent violence and abuse, and in others, helping women deal or cope with its consequences. Status of Women Canada's support for community-based projects has nearly doubled since 2007 to now almost $19 million a year, its highest level ever.
Or Toronto Centre.
A quarter of the global population is directly affected by disability. Ensuring that the world we live in is disability inclusive and free from barriers which prevent full participation in all aspects of our society is not only an issue of basic human rights but also one of citizenship. To mark the upcoming International Day of Persons with Disabilities, the Liberal Party of Canada is proud to announce changes that make the Liberal Party's websites more accessible to individuals with physical disabilities. These changes have been made in full partnership with Essential Accessibility, a Canadian company committed to making online environments instantly accessible to people with physical disabilities.
When we tear down barriers to information, Canadians can participate more fully in social and economic life and reach their full potential. Our party will continue to work with people with physical disabilities to improve their ability to communicate and accessibility.
In finding innovative ways of increasing national accessibility to digital information for disabled persons. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, our Conservative government made a firm commitment to improve Canada's infrastructure because we know how important it is for economic growth and prosperity. No other government has invested as much as we have with our Building Canada's plan, $33 million, and our Economic Action Plan. Today, the Minister of Transportation made an important announcement about what's to come in the future to support Canada's infrastructure.
With our provinces, territories, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to develop a new long-term infrastructure plan that will replace the Building Canada plan after 2014. The economy remains our government's #1 priority. Building world-class infrastructure in Canada is good for job creation and it enhances our competitiveness. Together with our supportive partners, we will continue to build on our enormously successful Building Canada plan. I call on the opposition parties to finally get on the right side of this issue and support this important plan that is supported by our partners right across this great country.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Mr. Speaker, more and more people are opposed to the Conservatives' unbalanced prisons agenda. The provinces have said they can't afford it. The police chiefs agree that the Conservatives' approach is skewed. Families want more officers on the beat instead of bigger prisons. And now we know even the Minister of Public Safety thinks the bill is seriously flawed. He himself has put forward amendments to the Conservative bill.
But his own incompetence got in the way. It turns out that you can't invoke closure, shut down debate, and then put forward amendments. The Conservatives now have a choice to make. They can stand with the Chief of Police, with provinces, with families, with their own public safety minister, and vote against this failed prisons agenda. And if this public safety minister has any shred of integrity whatsoever, he will stand with others who know this bill is flawed and vote against it.
The Honourable Member for North Vancouver.
Mr. Speaker, this week I had the opportunity to read a new job-killing scheme from a backroom NDP strategist. It is clear that the NDP actually believes that money is spent on tax cuts. The NDP actually believes that income doesn't belong to Canadians, it's just the money that government has been kind enough not to tax. Mr. Speaker, our government has cut taxes so Canadians can spend and invest their tax savings into our economy, and job creators can spend their tax savings, invest in new equipment and technology, and hire new employees. Thanks to our Conservative government, Canadians are paying a lot less tax than they used to. In fact, the average Canadian family pays up to $3,000 less in taxes than they used to before we took office. Mr. Speaker, the NDP opposed this tax relief. The NDP plans to impose job-killing taxes on Canadian families and business is the last thing our economy needs.
Oral questions, questions orales. L'Honourable Chef de l'Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was in Attawapiskat, and I want to report to the Prime Minister on the situation there. It's appalling. It's unimaginable. It's worse than anything that you could even think of. People are living in shacks. They're living in tents, in trailers. They have no heat. And any little heat they have is a fire hazard. They're sleeping on moldy mattresses. They have children who are living outside of the community. What is the Prime Minister going to do? Is he going to assume his leadership and go and visit people on the ground there? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said already, this is unacceptable when we invest more than $90 million to see such results. And that is why we are acting immediately to help people who have these urgent needs. But also, Mr. Speaker, we are going to take measures to improve in the long term the management in the community. The Minister will be making an announcement in this regard.
The Opposition.
Well, I agree with the Prime Minister. We can't just throw money at this problem and think that everything will be solved. All the problems in Attawapiskat. We need a plan. It's true in the short, medium, and long term. It takes political will, and we have not seen any of that in the past 10 years. What are you waiting for? Where is your leadership, Mr. Prime Minister? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it is the government who is acting, but the government is voting against these investments in the community. I repeat, this government has invested more than $90 million in the community, and the results are not acceptable. So we're going to take further measures to ensure better outcomes.
The Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister has to take responsibility. He has to take charge. It is his duty to help the people of Attawapiskat. an entire Canadian community living in third world countries. That's what we see right now. In the Arctic cold, -22 today. The Prime Minister should go and sleep by himself. You should sleep in a shack with a sleeping bag. You'll see that the sleeping bags provided by the Red Cross is not the solution. We need better. Winter is coming. Where is the action? Where is the leadership?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, this government has invested more than $90 million in this community since coming to office. Obviously, the results are not satisfactory, Mr. Speaker. That's why the government has people on the ground taking additional emergency action, and why also we will be now announcing additional steps to deal with management problems in this community.
Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis was declared a month ago in Attawapiskat, and the situation is serious. The Red Cross emergency team is right now on the ground there, but the question is, where's the federal government's plan? The government must work together with the community to find a long-term solution. Will the government declare a state of emergency and help the people in distress in Attawapiskat? The Honourable Minister of Indian Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to work with the province and the community to implement the emergency management plan to ensure that residents have access to warm, dry and safe shelter. On-the-ground assessment has determined that urgent health and safety issues demand immediate action. Therefore, we've informed Chief Spence that we are placing the First Nation in third-party management. I've also requested a comprehensive audit to identify how money has been spent and what oversight measures have been taken over the past 5 years.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, Attawapiskat is ground zero of a national catastrophe, and after a month of inaction, when the Red Cross had to step in, when emergency measures had to step in, their solution is to blame the community. If they wanted to know what was happening in the community, they could have called their co-manager, who's on the ground right now, who I spoke with yesterday. When the Red River floods, people show up. When Slave Lake burned, politicians showed up. Why are the people of Attawapiskat treated so differently? Why is it that when it's a First Nation community in distress, this government's response is contempt?
Mr. Speaker, our priority is ensuring that people in immediate need get adequate shelter as quickly as possible. We're also looking at ways to ensure this situation does not happen again. We agree that we cannot have Band-Aid solutions. There are larger structural issues here that need to be addressed. We will be providing short and longer-term ways to address these concerns. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the government that should be placed under third-party management is right across the way, right over there. That's what should be under third-party management. It's a classic case. It's a classic case. There are dozens of Attawapiskats. There are dozens of Attawapiskats right across this country. It's not the only community that's facing these conditions and these difficulties. The Auditor General of Canada herself said, Mr. Speaker, in her last report, that the Aboriginal people of this country are living in intolerable conditions. It's the government that has to take responsibility for what's happened and not simply continue to blame the victim. This government is all hat and no cattle when it comes to treating.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said repeatedly, this government has made large-scale investments in this community, unlike the party opposite when it was in government. And this government is determined and is prepared to take the steps necessary to ensure results with those funds. And that's why, by the way, Mr. Speaker, the people of Canada placed the Liberal Party under third-party management.
Order. 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 The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We can see to what extent the Prime Minister takes this problem seriously. He is doing the same thing that he did yesterday. That is, the investments in health and education are included in the amount of $90 million that he always is referring to today. He must take the responsibility for the fact that it is the Auditor General who said clearly that it is the federal government who is responsible for the problems of the living conditions in Attawapiskat and all other communities that are affected by the same problems. When will this government take the responsibility that is required for these problems? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it is unbelievable that the Liberal Party is attacking our government for having invested in health, education, and housing in these communities. It's our responsibility for the future of these communities. Education is the most important thing, and we will continue to make such investments.
Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Speaker, one of the government's first decisions was to cancel a $5 billion agreement that was negotiated for over a year between the provinces and the federal government, known as the Kelowna Accord. It was booked in the financial details of the company.
Order. Order. Shh. The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre has the floor.
So much for decorum, Mr. Speaker. We know where the decorum really lies in this House. These guys are prepared to heckle and intimidate and clap and stop others from talking. That's the way they manage. That's why, if there's a trusteeship to be established, Mr. Speaker, it should be a trusteeship on that government. They're the ones who failed to take responsibility. They're the ones who are failing to take charge, Mr. Speaker. That's where the problem lies.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party's idea of acting when it was in government after 13 years, putting out a press release without a plan. That's what we got from the Liberal Party. This government has put $90 million in this community, and yes, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all Canadians and the ordinary members of that First Nation, this government is prepared to do what the others were not prepared to do, and that is to make sure there is good management in these communities.
Hear, hear.
Member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Mr. Speaker, BC families didn't want the Conservative Liberal harmonized sales tax 3 years ago, but this government refused to listen. We rejected the unfair tax again in a referendum last summer. But this government wants to make BC families pay billions in penalties. This government continues to stall and refuses to implement the removal of the HST. Will the Conservatives finally take responsibility for their role and negotiate a fair deal for British Columbians? Why do they continue to ask BC families to pick up the tab for this absolute, utter, complete, Conservative Liberal HST fiasco?
The Honourable Minister of State for Finance.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we actually respect provincial jurisdiction, and the harmonization of a sales tax is provincial jurisdiction. British Columbia chose not to continue with that, Mr. Speaker, but the BC government has acknowledged the harmonization agreement stipulated transitional assistance must be recovered should the province wish to exit the program.
Member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Well, that sound you're hearing, Mr. Speaker, is the Conservatives desperately trying to blame somebody. They have nobody to blame but themselves. This government has already collected 2 years of HST revenue from BC families, and their unfair Conservative tax has already cost BC families hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year. Now, this Conservative government seems to want to make British Columbians pay and pay and pay. When will this government agree to give families a break and stop making them pay for the Conservative Liberal HST fiasco? When will they fix their BC HST error? When will they fix it?
State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the only HST error comes from the NDP. They're uncertain whether they're for it or against it. For example, in British Columbia, I understand now they're against it. In Quebec, they are for the HST. In Nova Scotia, they actually supported an increase in the GST, Mr. Speaker. You can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker. Either you want to reduce taxes for Canadians, make taxes fairer, or you don't. I'm assuming they don't.
Honourable Member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, once upon a time, there was a former journalist of CBC, and today he's the Minister of the Environment. He warned us at the time that GHGs were and I'm quoting, the most important of all environmental issues, how times have changed. Now, at the time, he said that future generations should be concerned about the threat of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, here we are today. What is the minister waiting for before presenting a real plan instead of pulling Canada out of Kyoto? The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Let me assure my colleague that Canada will participate in the Durban conference in the same good faith we've demonstrated at pre-COP meetings all through this year. Canada is working towards a new single international climate change agreement that will include all major emitters. The Cancun agreements, based on the Copenhagen Accord, provide a solid foundation for such a regime, and in Durban, we will work to implement this agreement.
For Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have a lot of faith in that good faith because it's Conservative inaction that's made us a climate change laggard and denied Canadians jobs in the new energy economy. But I don't blame them for wanting to pull out because Kyoto's independent emissions audits, well, they'd exposed 6 years of failure by this government, 6 years of failed environmental policies, and 6 years of failed federal leadership. Mr. Speaker, this government's climate inaction kills Canadians' jobs. So when will they stop blaming the Liberals for the failure of Kyoto, and when will they actually introduce a plan for a transition to a new energy economy?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for reminding this House that the Kyoto Agreement was one of the biggest blunders the previous Liberal government made. Canada will not take on a new target under the Kyoto Protocol, but we will not obstruct those who wish to cling to it. The protocol is neither effective nor fair, and it does not include commitments by all major emitters. We do remain committed to the Copenhagen Accord, which the Prime Minister signed, and we are working towards reaching our 2020 reduction targets.
St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the government itself admitted its own prisons agenda bill is flawed. The Public Safety Minister tried to introduce 11th-hour amendments to C-10, only to be ruled out of order by the Speaker. It seems that the mountain of opposition from experts, Crown prosecutors, the provinces and the public has struck a nerve. Mr. Speaker, now that the government has admitted its bill is flawed, will it finally work with others to make improvements, or will it continue to insist on ramming this bill through Parliament?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
We will, of course, make no such admission, Mr. Speaker. This bill is very targeted. It goes after drug dealers and child molesters, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, we consulted with the people of Canada. Millions of Canadians heard what we had to say. They gave us their support, and we're very grateful for that.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Well, we're used to speaking to walls with Bill C-10. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the House, the government finally admitted that its bill on crime had serious weaknesses. Experts say so, police officers say so, and so do the provinces. This bill is not good, it is not balanced, it's going to cost a fortune to the provinces. After months of turning a deaf ear, the government seems to have finally understood that it's made a mistake. Is it going to send this bill back to committee so that we can make the changes that are needed, or is it going to continue on the wrong track to the detriment of the provinces and families? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of Canadians and Quebecers, obviously apart from those on the other side of the House, have understood the important objectives of Bill C-10 to protect citizens against violent criminals. And a Quebec lawyer, the former minister, Marc Bellemare, said very recently that Minister Fournier did not speak on behalf of all Quebecers. I think that Quebec values are completely compatible with this bill. It is time that the members of the opposition stop duping Canadians and Quebecers.
Mr. Speaker, service at EI call centres is the worst it's been in 6 years, and yet the minister still won't admit she has a problem. She has the gall to blame staff for service slowdowns. That's outrageous. That minister cut 1,000 processing agent jobs. That's why call centres can't keep up, and jobless Canadians can't reach anyone when they need help. When will the minister stop her work to rule, admit she has a problem, and fix Service Canada call centres?
Minister of Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we do our
want to make sure that Canadians get access to the benefits that they need and deserve in a timely manner. That's why we're investing in upgrades to the systems, whether it's our EI processing, which is woefully paper-based and takes way too long to process, or whether it's our call centers. But I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that the opposite numbers are a bit wrong. In fact, most calls for assistance are handled and answered through the automated system.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, this government is desperately trying to justify its wrong-headed decisions. 1,000 processing agents in Service Canada have been laid off since the spring. Frustrated unemployed Canadians are waiting weeks before they can speak to a representative. The minister is now accusing employees of voluntarily slowing down the work. Will this government finally recognize that it is its cuts to Service Canada that are causing distress among unemployed families? The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Action plan to deal with the global recession. We did engage quite a number of additional personnel on a short-term basis. The employees knew that, the unions knew that. It was to help get over the hump in the spike of EI claims. Mr. Speaker, our unemployment rate is down. We no longer need all those people to process. They were released. Many of them, though, were actually absorbed into the system to work and continue to improve services so that Canadians do get the benefits they need in a timely manner.
Member for Vancouver, Kingsway.
Yesterday, the Immigration Minister claimed that only 2 Immigration and Refugee Board appointments had, quote, any association with the Conservative Party. Mr. Speaker, the facts disagree. Uppal, Gwinnett, Woolman, Andrechuk, all failed Conservative candidates, all appointed by that government. But there's more. At least 10 appointments were Conservative donors. Another was a senior advisor to a Conservative minister. Mr. Speaker, why are Conservatives making partisan appointments to an independent tribunal, and why did that minister mislead the House?
Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
I did no such thing, Mr. Speaker. I said I was aware of 2 individuals that I've appointed, 150 appointments and reappointments. Every single one of those individuals made it through the very rigorous pre-screening process where 90% of candidates are not actually recommended to the minister. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, just last week, the representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees told me that he thought Canada continues to have the world's model asylum system. And I think it's unfortunate that the NDP is denigrating the independence and the integrity of this important quasi-judicial body, which is regarded as a model throughout the world and which now has the most rigorous pre-screening process for appointments in its history.
Bravo. The Honourable Member for Humber, St. Barbe-Bert.
Mr. Speaker, as of today, the Conservatives are in formal default of their promise of a Muskrat Falls loan guarantee. After over a year of analysis, a financial equivalent is being floated instead. Offering a financial equivalent is a refusal to assume any future risk for the project. It is not a true loan guarantee and is not what was promised. In contrast, a true loan guarantee wouldn't cost the federal treasury a nickel as long as the project was technically and financially and economically viable. Mr. Speaker, will a loan guarantee be offered, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, the Muskrat Falls project will provide significant economic benefits to the Atlantic region and will generate will substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Good. We've reached many milestones in this process, including the new Dawn Agreement with the Innu of Labrador and appointing a financial advisor to ensure to ensure taxpayers' interests are respected. We will work together to ensure there is a guarantee. It will be a guarantee.
Order. The Honourable Député de Beauséjour.
The Honourable Member for Beauséjour.
8 months ago, Hank Tepper went to Lebanon with a Canadian trade delegation to sell potatoes. He's been held in a tiny Beirut jail cell ever since. 8 months in a Beirut jail for dubious allegations about potatoes sent to Algeria 4 years ago. This makes no sense at all. The minister should understand that a consular visit for 10 minutes once a month by a junior officer at our embassy is not going to solve the problem. So when will she take her responsibility, bring this Canadian citizen home to New Brunswick for Christmas?
The Honourable Minister of State for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, this House knows that the government is very concerned about Mr. Tepper's case and knows how difficult this is for him and his family. Consular officials, I've said this before, in Lebanon have been actively providing consular assistance and support to Mr. Tepper and his family since his arrival. As I've also mentioned, we are engaging on Mr. Tepper's behalf through quiet diplomatic channels because we strongly believe that this is the best possible approach, and we will continue to work in Mr. Tepper's best interests.
For Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, prejudicial legal maneuvering continues in the political persecution against former Ukrainian Prime Minister Tymoshenko. Now the judge who was to hear her appeal tomorrow has just been fired, and her health in jail continues to deteriorate. Other governments are wading in, so what is Canada doing? Is Canada insisting on all legal proceedings being public? Has independent medical help been provided? And has Ukraine been warned that anything untoward happening to Ms. Tymoshenko will damage relations with Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Sure, Mr. Speaker, this government has spoken out strongly against politically based judicial proceedings. We're tremendously concerned by what we've seen in Ukraine. We have been very clear with the government of Ukraine that Canadians, the government of Canada, expects that this individual will be treated fairly with an independent judicial process, and that there would be consequences to our bilateral relations if this doesn't happen. We remain very concerned about her health and are certainly prepared to offer her anything we can do to support her in that regard.
The Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
The so-called Build Canada Infrastructure Fund will run out in 2014, but this government can't be trusted to give municipalities what they need: accountable, comprehensive and transparent funding. They didn't even know how many jobs were created from the Economic Action Plan. So to ensure transparency and accountability this time, will the minister commit to tabling progress report on each phase of his consultation?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I was very proud this morning on behalf of this Prime Minister to launch the new process, three-phases process for the new infrastructure. I have here press release from la Fédération canadienne des municipalités, Connect Canada, Engineers Canada, all supporting us. Fédération Union Municipale du Québec, all supporting the great job we're doing about infrastructure. Prime Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Trinity Spadina.
2 out of 3 infrastructure applications from First Nation communities have been rejected since 2006. That's close to 1,000 applications from Aboriginal communities for roads, sewage treatment, and clean water. The First Nations were just told no. The results, desperate situations. These important applications should not be dismissed. They should be reviewed and approved. Why does this government, this infrastructure minister, continue to tolerate third world conditions in First Nations communities?
The Honourable Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have spent unprecedented money on infrastructure, on reserves. It doesn't all come out of the stimulus spending plan. A lot of it's departmental spending. We've spent it on water and wastewater systems. We've spent it on housing. We've spent it from Health Canada on health clinics. Mr. Speaker, this is an unprecedented level of investment in First Nations for any other government. This is a big accomplishment, and we want to continue to build from that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. We know that municipalities have a major challenge. Although the government has committed to making the gas tax permanent, this is still a major problem. The government gets 10 cents, but the municipalities get much less. will the government make sure to index this amount to municipalities and reassure Canadians that the money will go back to investing in our communities? Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, I had the honour this morning on behalf of the Prime Minister to present new programs that will provide for more infrastructure after 2014. This morning, the chair of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities praised this government and has said that no government had ever done so much for municipalities, $33 billion in the Building Canada Fund. There's never been such support.
Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member. We are waiting for 2014, but this government is once again turning its back on families by refusing to respond to funding requests for the Gertin Arena in Gatineau and a Coliseum in Trois-Rivières. These infrastructure projects are major economic drivers for these regions and help families. Why is this government refusing any contribution? Does it want to kill the economy in these regions? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, we have said in the past, and we have said it again in the past few days, we made an announcement on November 10th. We have been dealing with the Quebec government. We want to be very clear, and we have said this clearly, that when it comes to professional sport and so on, we can work with them, but we cannot provide the funding.
Statistics Canada reported that Canada's economy grew 3.5% in the third quarter. This growth is beyond the expectations of private sector economists and is a positive sign in troubled times. Yet we know that as a result of this period of economic uncertainty, there are many Canadian families that are struggling to make ends meet. Could the Prime Minister please comment on the government's plan to protect jobs and economic growth in Canada?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, today's numbers showing significant growth in the Canadian economy last quarter are very encouraging. At the same time, we remain very concerned about problems, particularly in Europe, the problems of debt and deficit.
These problems are shared by the world economy, which is very fragile. And this is why we are continuing to be focused on our jobs and low tax program.
As a government on jobs and growth, and also on keeping taxes low. And of course, Mr. Speaker, now is not the time for the kind of job-killing tax hikes proposed by the NDP.
The honourable member for Newton, North Delta.
Mr. Speaker, Hank Tepper's family in New Brunswick is still waiting for him to come home safe and sound. Today, we learned the RCMP sent his private information to Algeria before he was arrested. Mr. Speaker, this sounds like the Meher Ara scandal all over again. Will the Conservative government take responsibility for its role in this affair, and will they tell this House and the Tepper family what they are doing to bring Hank Tepper home today?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that the RCMP has assisted Interpol with a criminal investigation. I'm also advised that the RCMP cooperation was done in accordance with Canadian law. It would be inappropriate to comment any further as this matter is ongoing.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is no longer enough to say that the minister can't talk about this case publicly. What we have learned today is too serious. This isn't the first time that information on Canadian citizens has been provided to foreign governments, and often in situations that are very problematic. The RCMP did not even inform Hank Tepper that it was disclosing personal information to a foreign country. Mr. Speaker, what does this government intend to do to deal with the situation and bring Mr. Tepper back to Canada?
Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that the RCMP has assisted Interpol with a criminal investigation. I am also advised that the RCMP cooperation was done in accordance with Canadian law and that it would be inappropriate to comment any further as this investigation is ongoing.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Saint-Constant. Mr. Speaker, the problems go beyond those of Canadians detained abroad. After months of dithering with no announcement, the government is finally prepared to sign a border agreement with the United States, but nobody knows what's in the agreement. The Privacy Commissioner is concerned about how information will be shared with the Americans, but the government refuses to speak to him. This is a very simple question. Will the government commit to tabling the agreement in Parliament? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Has been reached. Ongoing discussions are taking place. When there is an agreement to be announced, we'll certainly be the first to do that. The members opposite will certainly be among the first to hear that. What we are seeking to do is to establish a relationship with the Obama administration to ensure that the border isn't a barrier to jobs, isn't a barrier to economic growth, isn't a barrier to growing the Canadian economy. There's a reason why the Canadian economy grew by 3.5% in the third quarter. It's because this government is focused like a laser on jobs and the economy, and we're going to continue to do so.
Honourable Member for Windsor West.
How can anyone trust this government when every time they negotiate with the Americans, it costs Canadian jobs and Canadian families lose out? That's the record. From the softwood lumber seller thickening the border, new fees slapped on Canadians, to this government's botched efforts on Buy American. Conservatives have failed to defend the interests of Canadians every single time. When will the minister bring an agreement before Parliament? Will they let Canadians see what the Conservatives are giving away this time?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is working with the Obama administration to try to allow trade to go back and forth between Canada and the United States. This is not just important, it is vital to the auto sector in southwestern Ontario and critical to the future economy of Windsor-Essex, Mr. Speaker. This member opposite disagrees with free trade. He doesn't want us to trade with the United States. He doesn't want a trade agreement with the United States. If he won't fight for jobs in Windsor-Essex, maybe he should step aside and let those of us on this side of the House do it.
The Honourable Member for Random, St. George's.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government has used privacy as a reason for getting rid of the long-form census. It used privacy as an excuse for killing the long gun registry. Despite their apparent concern about privacy, we now learn that they're willing to sign a perimeter security deal with the U.S., sharing the traveling information of Canadians. Why do the Americans have the right to know where Canadians are traveling if they're not going to or over American territory?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, no agreement has been concluded. No agreement has been announced. Yet the member opposite is scaremongering the Canadian people. What we are seeking to do is to have a constructive relationship with the Obama administration to ensure that goods and services can make their way across the border. That's good for Canadian jobs. It's good for American jobs. It's good for economic growth. That is the focus that this government is taking: job creation, protecting, and creating new jobs here in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Cartierville. Mr. Speaker, the government is refusing to provide the data from the gun registry to the provinces, but it will provide very important and personal information to the Americans, like the names of people who might be flying to Paris. Why is the government providing this information to the Americans, but not other information to the provinces?
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Minister.
Travels to the United States. They produce their passport. They have to tell them who they are and where they're going, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, we want it to be as easy as possible for Canadian firms to do business in the United States, to build and manufacture goods and services right here in Canada, and to sell them south of the border. A thickening border is preventing that, and this government, under the leadership of this Prime Minister, is doing the right thing for Canada, doing the right thing for jobs, working constructively with the Obama administration. That's real leadership.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, this summer, when the Conservatives decided to pledge allegiance to royalty by putting up the Queen's portrait everywhere and adding the word royal to our Air Force, they plain forgot to think about an intelligent French acronym. They decided to act quickly and call it the FARC. You don't need a lesson in geopolitics to know that the FARC is a terrorist organization in Colombia. Who can the Minister of Defense blame for that gaffe? The Honourable Minister of National Defense. Mr. Speaker, the name of our Air Force is the Aviation Royale Canadienne in French, and we are very proud of them.
Major General Charlie Bouchard and our entire Royal Canadian Air Force for all they did to bring about success and liberation of the people of Libya. Let's just say, félicitations et merci.
I want to say congratulations and thank you.
Order.
Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. This name change was improvised. The French acronym was written on the back of a napkin. This gaffe shows the lack of consideration for French, but the Conservatives are good at improvising the management of military bases, equipment procurement, and so on. How can the government explain to Francophones in the military, in the Air Force, and their families who are proud of the work that they do, that they initially wanted to give the name of a terrorist organization to their organization?
Yes,
Mr. Speaker, the putting royal back in the names of the three branches of our military is an important part of our heritage and shows the importance of our military today. We are proud of the name, and we are particularly proud of the people who work on behalf of our country.
Mr. Speaker, in July of this year, our Canadian forces handed over Task Force Kandahar to American personnel, and we began drawing down on equipment and personnel. The Canadian focus for the next few years would be our training mission centered in and around Kabul. Today, we learn that Task Force Canuck, our tactical airlift unit, will be welcomed home at 8-Wing Trenton. Can the Minister of National Defence tell the House what Task Force Canuck accomplished in Kandahar?
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, the member from Northumberland, Quinte West, and home of 8-Wing Trenton is correct. Today, the Chief of the Defence Staff, other senior military commanders will welcome home the crew of Task Force Canuck, our outstanding Hercules aircraft unit that conducted operations in Afghanistan. They began their engagement in Afghanistan in 2001, transporting Canadian Forces personnel and equipment in and out of the Kandahar airfield, as well as supporting the ISAF mission brilliantly. Mr. Speaker, they completed more than 3,400 logistical and operational missions successfully and safely over that 10-year period. We welcome them home. We thank them. We congratulate them, Mr. Speaker. They are
the honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, the IOUs for climate change are coming. But instead of trying to solve climate change, the Conservatives are saying, get used to it, let's adapt. And worse, paying lip service to that enormous cost of adaptation. These enormous IOUs for climate change add to the $600 billion of debt that they are passing on to our kids. We're causing climate change. Why should our kids pay for it? I believe that's not fair. I believe that's immoral. Why have they made Canada a quitter on climate change, on solving climate change?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, bad enough that the Liberals embraced Kyoto in the first place. What made it truly outrageous was that they did that with no intention of ever fulfilling their obligations. But let me just offer a quote from another lucid member of this House. The Liberal government's plan in terms of the Kyoto Agreement was basically written on the back of an aeroplane napkin on the way to Kyoto. There was no long-term planning. There was no real negotiation with the provinces or with industry. It was a hastily drafted agreement. Who said that? The member for King's Hunts. In a moment of
Order. The
honourable member for La Pointe-de-l'Île. Mr. Speaker, on November 7th, Air Canada decided to move its headquarters to Brampton in Ontario. This move would require over 140 employees to either move or quit their job. The majority of them may opt to stay in Montreal, which would make it difficult for Air Canada employees to get services in French. Mr. Speaker, will the government comply with the act that requires Air Canada's headquarters to be in Montreal and ensure bilingualism? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, we recently introduced, in keeping with what my colleague has said, a change to the Official Languages Act to make sure that those who have contracts with Air Canada will comply with those commitments. We know that Air Canada is a private company, and it is one of the best businesses in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying yesterday, Canadians gave our government a strong mandate to end the wasteful and ineffective long gun registry once and for all. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The NDP has punished its members for voting with their constituents. It has sent members into committee to try to gut our legislation, and it is now engaging in misleading propaganda, claiming that restricted firearms would become non-restricted after the registry is abolished. Could the minister comment on whether ending the long gun registry will do this?
Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, first the NDP show a restricted firearm on their misleading ads and claim it was non-restricted. When this deceit was uncovered, they were forced to change their ads. And what did they replace it with, Mr. Speaker? Yet another restricted firearm they claim to be non-restricted. I would call on the NDP to end this ridiculous and misleading campaign. Repeatedly playing fast and loose with the facts just shows Canadians that the NDP are unfit to govern.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, with the cuts that are planned for Canada Post, we are starting to wonder if we need to live downtown in order to get postal services. Has the government forgotten that postal service is an essential service? Canadians and Quebecers who live in rural areas need and have the right to receive their mail and have a nearby post office. Driving or walking 30 to 40 minutes to get the mail is unacceptable. Why is the government refusing to take action?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is committed to quality postal service for all Canadians, no matter where they live. That is why our government introduced the Canadian Postal Service Charter. We expect Canada Post to abide by the Charter and provide quality postal service that Canadians can count on. Mr. Speaker, we're focused on service to Canadians like a laser. That member is zapped. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Once again, the Conservative government is bringing shame on Canada at the Durban Climate Change Conference by collecting fossil awards and being criticized for its inaction on reducing greenhouse gases, whether we are talking about the Quebec Premier, the Minister of Environment of Quebec, or Desmond Tutu, all of them criticize Canada. Can the government tell us what interests its government is protecting in Durban? The Honourable Minister of Environment.
Proud of the abundance of natural resources with which our country has been blessed. We are also proud of the responsible and sustainable way that these resources are being developed. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we are proud of our commitment to the Copenhagen and Cancun agreements and our pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 17% by 2020.
That concludes question period for today. Tabling of documents, dépôt des documents. What's that? What? Oh. Introduction of government. What's it? Oh. Introduction of government bills. Mr. Menzies for Mr. Flaherty, seconded by Mr. Van Loan, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada Act. This motion is deemed adopted. Mr. Menzies for Mr. Flaherty, seconded by Mr. Van Loan, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Déclaration de ministre.
Statements by ministers.
From interparliamentary delegations, the honourable member for Prince Edward Hastings.